Chapter 21, Lost Cause.
How can you really say that we're a lost cause and you're giving up on me? Do you really think I'm not worth all the trouble that I've been causing?
When Izuku arrived at the studio on the morning of the shoot, the entire place was abuzz. "There he is," his co-worker shouted the moment he walked through the door, pointing her finger accusingly. "The traitor." Immediately Izuku was surrounded. "How could you not tell us that you were doing the shoot with Togata?" another cried out despairingly. "After I introduced you to the anti-heroes and everything." Izuku ducked his head and briskly walked towards the private offices at the back of the studio. He knocked once, then, without waiting for a response, opened the door and closed it behind him. Mirio looked up from his computer, visibly startled. After a moment he closed his mouth and smiled. "Midoriya," he said jovially. "Fantastic morning, isn't it?" "I don't think I can do this," Izuku said, his heart thumping wildly. "Of course you can," Mirio replied. "Don't sell yourself short." Izuku could hear his co-workers muttering on the other side of the door. "They know," he said hoarsely. "No one's supposed to know." Mirio shrugged. "This is the beat. Word gets around one way or another. You should count yourself lucky that they only found out on the day of the shoot." Panicked thoughts began to swirl around in Izuku's mind. He felt nauseous and unprepared to deal with his angry boss, his co-workers, and, most of all, with Katsuki. "You should do the shoot," he said. "You have more experience. You're more qualified." Mirio frowned. "This isn't like you, Midoriya," he said. He eyed Izuku curiously. "What's going on?" Izuku hesitated. "It's the lead singer," he said haltingly. "You know him, right?" Mirio asked. "I heard he asked for you specifically." Izuku nodded slowly. "We kind of have history," he said vaguely. "We had a falling out and haven't spoken for months." Mirio looked at Izuku blankly. "You have history?" When Izuku winced and looked away, his eyes widened. "Oh." He raised his hands and made air quotations. "History." Izuku reddened, rubbing his arm self-consciously. This wasn't the most comfortable conversation to be having with a co-worker. "I don't know what the hell he's trying to do," he muttered. "Well, that certainly complicates things," Mirio commented cheerfully. He leaned back in his chair and hummed to himself. "Mind if I give you some advice?" "Please." "Keep things professional," Mirio said. "Treat this like all of the other photo shoots we've done together. Don't let on that you're nervous." He smiled reassuringly at Izuku. "It's too late to get out of the shoot, but I'll be there assisting you. You're not doing this alone." Izuku smiled weakly. "Thanks," he said. He knew in his heart that he would have to go through with it, but it was comforting to know that Mirio would have his back. Mirio nodded and stood up. "Stay here and collect yourself. I'll get rid of your fan club." He saluted Izuku and headed for the door, opening it and shutting it behind him. Izuku took a seat in his office chair. "Hello, friends," Mirio said, his voice muffled. "What a beautiful day it is. This calls for a classic Togata joke. This one's a thinker. Are you ready?" Two guys walk into a bar, the third one ducks. A long pause. "Ha. Get it?" Izuku groaned quietly. He closed his eyes and put his hands on his knees, breathing in through his nose and out through his mouth. He had to get through today. There was no way around it. When Izuku cracked the door and poked his head out, his co-workers were nowhere in sight. He tiptoed out of the office and over to the set. He spent most of the morning prepping the location, focusing on one task at a time. Mirio joined him after a while and together they conducted a series of test shots. When Izuku met with the makeup, hair, wardrobe, and props departments around noon, Mirio tagged along. Izuku would have felt better if his boss hadn't kept popping in every few minutes to check in on them and glower at him, but Mirio had proven to be very good at diverting her attention. He was turning out to be a real lifesaver. Izuku was making final adjustments to the set when he heard the sound of approaching footsteps. He turned quickly and almost smacked right into Yurika Okako. They both startled and took a step back. Sorry, Izuku stammered. It had been months since they'd last crossed paths, but he hadn't forgotten his shame over how he'd treated her. It's okay. Okako squeaked, clenching her fists. You know who asked me to let you know that they'll be down in 10 minutes. Right, Izuku said, his gut twisting. Thanks. How is she today? Over the moon, Okako replied. She's been openly drooling over the band since they arrived. Izuku nodded and fell silent. Okako eyed Izuku's stiff posture, his clenched jaw. She opened and closed her mouth as if debating what to say. Are you going to be all right? Izuku hadn't been expecting a question like that from her, not after everything. He forced himself to smile. Guess I have to be, he said. Okako bit her lip. Izuku cleared his throat. I'm really sorry about everything. Oh, you don't dash, Okako started to say. I do, Izuku interjected. It was wrong of me not to say anything to you. I got caught up in my own emotions and pushed everyone else aside. I was selfish. Okako was visibly taken aback. After a moment, she smiled. It wasn't all you. You were upset and I turned my back on you. I was a bad friend. Izuku shook his head. You're a great person, Okako. I don't know. You can do better than me. Probably, Okako agreed. After a moment she began to giggle. Izuku chuckled despite himself. It wasn't perfect, but he felt as though the air was starting to clear. Good luck with the shoot, Okako said, turning to leave. Thanks, Izuku said. You know, Kaminari talks an awful lot about you. Okako made a face. What, Denki? He flirts with everyone. But Izuku, Okako said, her smile straining. Too soon. Izuku clamped his mouth shut. Right. I'll see you around. Maybe, she replied enigmatically. She inclined her head politely, then turned and headed for the exit. Izuku watched her leave. It felt good to talk to Okako again. He hoped that it would be the first of many conversations to come. Mirio approached Izuku. How are you feeling? He asked. Better, Izuku replied truthfully. He examined the set. A large white canvas stood 10 feet tall and draped across the floor for as many feet. A hefty studio camera had been set up on a tripod and directly connected to a laptop on a stand. The lights were good to go. The props, wardrobe, makeup, and hairstylist were set up at their respective stations. He was as ready as he'd ever be. Glad to hear it, Mirio said. Remember everything that you've learned. You'll do fine. Oh. Mirio's eyes drifted over Izuku's shoulder. Here they are. Izuku stiffened. He closed his eyes and inhaled deeply. Be professional, he thought. He's just another client. Izuku opened his eyes and turned around, plastering a smile on his face. Nemuri and you were escorting the antiheroes through the studio. Nemuri was animatedly chatting with Mina while Kirishima and Katsuki followed behind. Kirishima was chewing on his lip and Katsuki. Izuku! Mina shrieked. She darted away from Nemuri and pulled him into a tight embrace. I missed you, she wailed. She hopped up and down and stepped on his foot. Izuku grimaced. He'd be lying if he'd said he wasn't happy to see Mina, but his boss and the editor-in-chief were watching and they already suspected him of being romantically involved with the band. He put his hands on Mina's shoulders and gently pushed her away. Mina, he said, still smiling. It's been a long time. He nervously glanced at his employers. Mina frowned. She opened her mouth to say something but Izuku quickly redirected her. Mina, this is Togata Mirio, he said. He'll be assisting me today. From the corner of his eye, he saw Nemuri give him a thumbs up. Mina's eyes twinkled. You look more like a football player than a photographer, she said, shaking Mirio's hand enthusiastically. Mirio laughed. Have you ever tried lifting one of these cameras? He joked. While Mina was occupied with Mirio, Izuku turned to Kirishima. It's good to see you again, he said, shaking his hand politely. Kirishima grinned. He shook Izuku's hand heartily. You too, bro, he said. I hope we didn't put you out. You didn't, Izuku replied. Let's have a good shoot. Kirishima nodded. Izuku finally turned his attention to Katsuki. He was standing behind Kirishima with his hands in his pockets. The bags under his eyes were perhaps a little darker and his shoulders had a heavier slouch to them. He was frowning, but his crimson eyes seemed uncertain. Izuku unexpectedly felt an old anger flare up inside of him. What right did Katsuki have to look like a wounded animal after everything he'd done to him? Ground Zero, he said coldly. He extended his hand. Long time no see. Kirishima and Mina winced. Katsuki's face twitched. He hesitantly accepted the hand, shaking it slowly. Izuku tried to ignore the swirl of confused emotions that bubbled up inside of him. Yeah, Katsuki said. Now. Mirio said, clapping his hands together. Allow me to introduce the three of you to our hair, makeup, and wardrobe department. They'll be taking care of you this afternoon. I'm so excited. Mina chirped. She eagerly led her bandmates away. Looks like everyone's getting settled, Nemuri said. Do your best, Midoriya. She gave him a big wink. Right, Izuku said, knowing all too well what you had planned. I will. After Nemuri left, you glowered at him. I'll be watching you, she said. She turned on her heel, barking instructions at everyone she passed. She's in a mood, huh? Mirio commented when he returned. Midnight must have really taken to the band. Izuku said. Mirio laughed. They should be ready within the hour. Izuku nodded. His hand tingled from the handshake. He flexed his fingers, eager to rid himself of the sensation. Let's go over our lineup, he said. I think we should start with the individual shots, move on to the flashier ideas for the cover, then finish with the group shots. Good idea, Mirio said encouragingly. Keep in mind that the talent might be running low on energy towards the end. Mina was the first to emerge, sauntering onto the canvas and twirling theatrically. She was wearing a stylistically ripped miniskirt, a transparent black blouse, and a pair of stilettos. Her hair had been styled so that it hung in her face and her lips were painted a dark red. Mina looked down at herself and giggled. Not sure it's me, but it's interesting, she said. What do you think, Izuku? Izuku hesitated. It was true that the style was hardly Mina, but he wasn't about to ruffle any feathers. You look great, he said candidly. Mina wrinkled her nose. I guess I shouldn't turn down a compliment. How'd the interview go? Izuku asked as Mirio directed her to a spot on the canvas. It was a lot of fun. Mina exclaimed. It was so weird seeing Kaken out of his element though. Interviews aren't really his thing, did you know that? Ag and I ended up doing most of the talking. Izuku raised his eyebrows. The idea that Katsuki might get tongue-tied in an interview had never crossed his mind. Was he nervous? Were the questions too personal? You don't care, he reminded himself. Stop thinking about him. Izuku and Mirio walked Mina through several poses. She reveled in the attention, hamming it up and adding her own little flourishes. They had to dial her back a couple of times, but they made it up to her by letting her invent a few of her own poses towards the end. Kirishima emerged from the back and snuck in next to Izuku. He watched Mina with an adoring expression. He'd been dressed in a studded vest and a pair of tight leather pants. Kirishima tugged at the waistband of his pants and wiggled his hips around. "These are uncomfortable," he grumbled. Izuku looked at Kirishima's getup and couldn't help but feel a little sorry for him. However, he had a job to do. "Can you move the soft box a little to the left?" he asked Mirio. "Yes, sir," Mirio replied enthusiastically, chortling to himself. The man was somehow always in a good mood and today was no exception. Izuku turned to Kirishima and patted him on the shoulder. "You're next," he said. "Are you ready?" Kirishima nodded, high-fiving Mina as they swapped out. Mina approached Izuku and looked at the laptop screen. "This is so cool," she said. Katsuki emerged several minutes into Kirishima's shoot. His look was a hollow reflection of his usual style. The leather jacket that he was wearing was adorned with immaculate rows of studs and lined with gold thread. For some reason, the designer had taken the time to painstakingly embroider the word Rebel onto the right breast pocket. Meanwhile, the makeup artist had apparently researched the anti-heroes because he'd attempted to replicate Katsuki's eye makeup. However, instead of a haphazard smear, the makeup had been applied in a clean and precise manner. Izuku couldn't help but think that it was all wrong. Katsuki's eyes caught Izuku's. He looked down at himself and picked at the embroidery. "Ain't nothing punk about this," he muttered dryly. Kirishima and Mina snickered. Izuku started to smile until he caught Katsuki's smirk. His expression immediately soured and Katsuki's smirk faded. He took a seat in one of the chairs that had been set up off to the side of the set. Izuku did his best to ignore Katsuki while he focused on Kirishima. "You passed by the set but, finding nothing to complain about, sulked away unhappily." When Kirishima's individual session was complete, Izuku sighed and glanced at the blonde. He was leaning forward in the chair and staring off into the distance. "Okay. It's your turn now," he said. When Katsuki didn't react, Mina made a sound in the back of her throat. "Ka-chan," she said softly. Katsuki blinked and stood up. "Right," he grunted. Mina and Kirishima sat down while Mirio left to fetch a few water bottles. Katsuki stepped onto the white canvas and looked at Izuku expectantly. There were 100 questions that he wanted to ask him. Why had he forced him into this situation? Why had he never called or texted? Why was he being so uncharacteristically quiet? Instead, Izuku steadied his heart and remembered Mirio's advice. Mirio returned and offered a water bottle to Kirishima and Mina, then left a third on Katsuki's empty seat. He sidled up next to Izuku. "Hanging in there," he whispered. Izuku bit his lip. "Yeah. Good." Mirio looked through camera's viewfinder. "I'd raise the tripod an inch or two to compensate for his height." "Got it?" While Izuku adjusted the tripod, Mirio waved his arms at someone. "Sorry," he called out. "This is a closed set." Izuku turned and saw a pair of heads disappear behind a green canvas. He shot Mirio a grateful look. Katsuki barely said a word the entire time that Izuku worked with him. He followed instructions quietly and without complaint. It was unnerving. Izuku would have never believed that the blonde could be so docile. More unnerving, however, was the way that Katsuki openly stared at him. It was impossible for Izuku to ignore, and judging by Kirishima's, Mina's, and Mirio's expressions, it was apparent to them as well. By the third time that he had to redirect his attention, Izuku was red-faced and flustered. He was sure that he was doing it on purpose. Eventually his embarrassment was overtaken by anger. He wanted to yell at Katsuki to stop staring at him or threaten to kick him out of the building. He repeated Mirio's advice like a mantra in his head. Finally Izuku reached his breaking point. "Take a break," he muttered. I'll be back in a minute. He left the set without waiting for a response. Izuku made a beeline for the private employee bathroom. He locked the door behind him and began to pace, wishing he had something that he could scream into. F him, F him, F him, F him, he growled. He wasn't even entirely sure what he was so upset about. Katsuki had somehow managed to rile him up without saying a single word. He remembered the song that Katsuki had written about him and fought back tears. He didn't want this. He didn't want this anymore. How dare Katsuki make him feel like this? How dare his boss force him into this position? Izuku swiped at his eyes. He was sick and tired of everyone jerking him around. What was he doing this for? He'd long since outgrown his job. He was fed up with everyone's games. He wasn't going to play along anymore. Izuku stormed back onto set, catching Mirio off guard. He glanced up from his phone and hastily shoved it into his pocket. Midoriya, he said. Everything good? Yeah, Izuku said a little too loudly. We're going to make some changes. Mirio grinned. Glad to have you back. Izuku dragged the soft box away from the set and replaced it with a harsher light. The beat doesn't know what they're doing. They can't feature a band like the Antiheroes then dress them up like they're the latest fashion trend. If they want to sell them, they have to do something different. He grinned humorlessly. If there's one thing I know how to do well by now, it's concert photography. Mirio looked delighted. What do you need? Gel filters, Izuku replied. Let's start with yellow and red. He pointed to an area behind the camera. Plus a row of floor lights. While Mirio got to work, Izuku racked his brain. What could he do to create a realistic concert aesthetic? They had access to prop instruments, clothing, and makeup. He smirked. Izuku rounded the set and headed for the makeup station. Mina was receiving touch UPS while Kirishima and Katsuki were being fussed over by wardrobe. Hey, Izuku said to the makeup artist. What did you use for the black makeup around Ground Zero's eyes? The makeup artist raised an eyebrow. Theater grease paint, he replied. He rummaged around in his kit and showed Izuku the container. Perfect. Izuku plucked the product from the man's hands and tossed it to Katsuki. He caught it effortlessly. Fix it, he instructed. Katsuki seemed confused but obediently opened the container and stuck 2 fingers directly into the product. He annihilated the man's work in seconds, smearing the grease paint across his eyes without even looking in a mirror. He closed the container and tossed it back to Izuku. How's that? Better, Izuku said appraisingly. For the first time that day, Katsuki grinned. Izuku returned the grease paint to the artist, who choked back a sob. He turned his attention to Mina. You. He pointed at Kirishima. Go give him a big kiss. He raised a finger to his mouth. Really smear it around, yeah. Mina's face lit up. Yes, sir, she chirped. She hopped out of her chair and flung an arm around Kirishima's neck, planting a big, wet kiss on his cheek. She mashed her lips against his face, then left a trail of small pecks along the side of his neck, ending it with a wet lick. Kirishima flushed and grinned toothily. Mina pulled away, her lips were heavily smeared and Kirishima's face and neck were covered with lipstick residue. Excuse me. What are you doing? The makeup artist snapped. We have instructions to follow, you know. Yeah, but the instructions sucked, Izuku retorted. He could have sworn that he heard Katsuki suppress laughter. We have new orders now. We're going a little grittier than originally planned. He pulled out his phone and found his old photos of the band, specifically of Katsuki. He showed them to the makeup artist. Can you recreate this? The makeup artist looked down at the photo, up at Katsuki, then down at the photo again. That's a lot of sweat. Izuku shrugged. You've done wet looks before, right? He glanced at Katsuki and sneered. Do your worst. The wardrobe assistant came over and peered at the photograph. We can't do that, they squawked. We won't be able to return the shirt or jacket. It'll ruin them. Then take them off, Izuku replied, his mind going a mile a minute. That should give the fans something to be happy about, right? Wait, Katsuki said. You. Izuku whirled around. You want a good photo shoot, right? Katsuki opened and closed his mouth. Yeah. Izuku turned back to the makeup artist and wardrobe assistant. Well, he asked. Can you do it? Do you have permission for this? The wardrobe assistant asked. Yes, Izuku lied. The makeup artist stared at Izuku disbelievingly, then rolled his eyes. Okay, Mr. Ground Zero, he said. I hope you're okay with these changes, because this isn't going to be much fun for you. Katsuki sat down in the makeup chair. It's fine, I guess, he muttered. If that's what he wants. The makeup artist patted his shoulder sympathetically. You're a good sport. If it makes you feel any better, we have showers that you can use afterwards. Izuku fled before Katsuki's words could make him feel guilty over what he was about to do to him. When he returned to set, Mirio was placing filters over a row of floor lights. Once he popped the last one in, he turned the lights on. Bright beams of red and yellow struck the canvas. What do you think? He asked. Not bad, Izuku said. He began turning every other light so that their beams intersected. He glanced around, Yu was nowhere in sight. Thanks for your help, Togata. You don't have to continue assisting me. You're a great guy and I don't want you to get into trouble. Izuku knew what he was risking, but that didn't mean that he had to drag Mirio down with him. What kind of assistant leaves mid-shoot? Mirio replied. He grinned. Besides, I want to see this through. You're quite the problem child. Izuku laughed. I hope that's a compliment. Izuku and Mirio conducted a series of new test shots then made some alterations. They didn't notice the band's return until Mina let out a whoop. How are you feeling? Izuku asked. Much better, Mina admitted. She walked over to the props and grabbed a bass guitar. Poor Kaken doesn't look like he's feeling great, though. Mina turned her head and put her hand over her mouth, stifling giggles. Katsuki was trying to appear casual, but his gait was stiff and he was holding his arms away from his sides. His torso, neck, arms, and face glistened with the sheen of sweat, but Izuku knew better. That combination of glycerin and water wasn't pleasant for anyone and Katsuki was doused with it. The makeup artist had even worked it into his hairline. Katsuki looked at Izuku accusingly. This is gross, he said. Izuku shrugged and pressed his lips together. That's editorial for you. Katsuki ran a greasy hand through his hair, his biceps rippling more noticeably due to the glycerin. If you wanted me to be sweaty, I could have run a few laps. It wouldn't have photographed the same, Izuku responded. This much was true, but he would have been lying if he'd said he wasn't enjoying making Katsuki as uncomfortable as possible. Are we good to shoot? 1 second. The makeup artist came running from the back with a spray bottle in hand. He approached Katsuki and raised the bottle. Please close your eyes, sir. Katsuki complied and was promptly sprayed in the face with a more diluted version of the glycerin and water combination. The spray beaded and trickled down his face, adding another layer of realism. Katsuki grimaced. Mirio whistled. That looks really good, he said. Katsuki tried to blink a droplet out of his eyelashes. Mirio sat Mina and Kirishima down while Izuku conducted a couple of final test shots with Katsuki. Mirio came over to review the photographs and make some suggestions. The next photo made Izuku smile. It was perfect. Let's get the guitar, he said. The second that Mirio handed Katsuki the guitar, his demeanor changed. He accepted the instrument without hesitation and slung it over his shoulder. "So what are we doing?" he asked. He looked at the floor lights. "Faking a concert." "More or less," Izuku replied. "You're still going to have to take directions and pose." Katsuki nodded. He gripped the neck of the guitar and placed his other hand over the strings. He glowered at the camera. "Tilt your head back a little," Izuku said. "Really sell the attitude." Katsuki curled his lip and tilted his head. Izuku looked through the viewfinder, then glanced at Mirio. "Can you help him?" he asked. Mirio stepped in. "Pardon me, Ground Zero," he said politely. He raised the electric guitar slightly, adjusted the angle, then tilted Katsuki's head forward. He stepped back. "Thanks," Izuku said. He took a photograph. Katsuki's snarl was intimidating under the concert lighting, the colored beams reflecting off of his greasy muscular shoulders and arms. Having Katsuki remove his shirt had been a good idea, but as Izuku tried not to stare, he couldn't help but wonder at what personal cost. He shook his head. "Don't usually perform shirtless," Katsuki muttered. He slid his hand along the guitar neck. "This is a cover shoot," Izuku reminded him. "Now give me a scream." Katsuki frowned but did as he was told. Izuku and Mirio cycled through a series of poses, each one better than the last. Mirio seemed genuinely into the concept, and Katsuki, while somewhat stiff, sold the poses. His sneers and glowers complemented the atmosphere all too well. The sound of clicking heels brought Izuku back to reality. He turned his head and saw a flash of light blonde hair. He shot Mirio a panicked glance. "What do we do?" he whispered. Mirio rubbed his chin then smiled. "I've got this," he said. He took off like a gunshot towards the sound. "Ms. Takeyama," he exclaimed. "I'm so glad to see you. I actually had a question that I'd like to ask if you don't mind." Izuku listened as the sound of the heels receded. He breathed a sigh of relief. Katsuki eyed Izuku suspiciously. "You don't have permission for this, do you?" "What do you care?" Izuku hissed. Katsuki averted his eyes. "I don't like this," he said. "Tough." "Deku." "Shut up." Izuku snapped. The makeup artist gasped and almost dropped his spray bottle. Izuku glared at Katsuki, seething. He had no right to complain. He was putting himself out for them, wasn't he? "Take off the guitar," he said. Katsuki did as he was told. Izuku beckoned the makeup artist over. "Give him a really good refresher." By the time that he was done with Katsuki, glycerin trailed down every exposed inch of his body. Kirishima and Mina were watching intently. Katsuki, for the first time that day, glared at Izuku. He opened his mouth, but then he closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and refocused. "Now what?" he asked. Izuku startled. "I'm going to take a few close shots," he said slowly. "Raise your arms over your head." Katsuki hesitated but obeyed. Izuku snapped a picture. "Tilt your chin up about an inch," he said. "Look right into the camera. Curl your lip." Izuku snapped a couple more photographs. "Bring your arms out. Bend your elbows and place your hands on the back of your neck. Smirk." Mina poked Kirishima and whispered something into his ear. Izuku ignored them and focused on the images. The pose accentuated Katsuki's ABS and tattoo in all of the right ways. He hated to admit it, but Katsuki looked damn good like this. He always had. Izuku heard a whisper behind him. He turned his head and watched one of his co-workers duck her head back. He bit his tongue and took a few more photos. Mina started to giggle. When he instructed Katsuki to hook his thumb into the waistband of his jeans and pull them down slightly, she could no longer contain herself. "Hey, Izuku," she called out teasingly. "Are you shooting for the beat or Playboy?" Izuku snorted. She wasn't entirely wrong. Katsuki pulled his hand away from his pants. Is that what this looks like? He asked. Izuku frowned. It's hardly different from what we were doing earlier, he said. Katsuki took a step backwards and rubbed the back of his head self-consciously. It's different. Why? Izuku scoffed. I've seen you walk around shirtless off like it's nothing. Because that was in private, and this is for the front cover of a magazine. Katsuki snapped, his voice raising an octave. He swore and turned away from Izuku, his hands on his hips. Mina got up and touched his hand. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I shouldn't have said anything. Katsuki waved her off. He took a few more deep breaths then turned back to Izuku. His face was flushed. I'm here to promote my music, he said unsteadily. Not, he gestured towards his exposed chest. Izuku wasn't sure how to process what had just happened. The part of him that still wanted revenge was tempted to tell Katsuki to suck it up, but Katsuki's unhappy expression stopped him. It was blatantly obvious that he was deeply uncomfortable. Izuku found himself struck with an unexpected sense of guilt. He sighed. Take 10, he said. I think we could all use a break. While Katsuki and the band were taking a breather, Mirio returned. Together they prepared for the final group shoot. When the band returned, Katsuki seemed more like his usual self. The final shoot went seamlessly. The antiheroes were at their strongest as a group, each of them experts at playing off of each other's strengths. Whether Mina was pretending to strangle the boys, Kirishima was jamming out on his prop drum set, or Katsuki was posing for the camera, the band had a strong sense of unity. Mina and Kirishima genuinely appeared to be having fun and Katsuki had shaken off enough of whatever had happened to get his head back in the game. I think that's a wrap, Izuku finally said. Great job, everyone. Mina cheered. Let's get these transferred, Izuku said to Mirio as he disconnected the camera from the laptop. Mirio nodded. Thanks, Izuku. Mina said. Hey, Katsuki started to say. You must be uncomfortable, the makeup artist interjected. He handed Katsuki a towel. I'll show you to the showers. As Katsuki was led away, Izuku followed Mirio into his office. Once the door was closed, he slumped. It's over, he said. Mirio chuckled and sat down at his desk. Izuku set the laptop down so that he could connect it to his computer. I can't say the day was without its hiccups, Mirio said. But overall, I think it went decently. Izuku pulled up a chair while his photographs uploaded to the company server. As the images rapidly flashed across the computer screen, he closed his eyes and tilted his head back. That was one of the hardest things I've ever done. At least you won't have to see him again. Izuku fell silent. For some reason, Mirio's words made him feel incredibly sad. The computer chimed, signaling that the upload was complete. Shall we take a quick look? Mirio asked. Izuku opened his eyes. Yeah. Mirio hummed to himself as he flipped through the images. Izuku couldn't help but feel a sense of pride over how well they had turned out. Do you think they'll like them? He asked. Mirio considered. I'm not sure, he replied honestly. Some of these are really good, but then again, he smiled sympathetically. They're not really the beat, are they? Izuku chewed on his lip. Think I might be out of a job. I think it'll depend on how Midnight responds to them. If she loves them, you might find yourself with a promotion. If she doesn't, Mirio paused. At any rate, it's always good to have a backup plan. Izuku snorted. Thanks for the honesty. Mirio disconnected the laptop. Ms. Takeyama will want to see them tonight. I'd recommend leaving soon and dealing with the aftermath tomorrow. Izuku nodded. You've really done me a solid, Togata. Regardless of what happens, I appreciate you having my back. I owe you a big one. Mirio laughed and waved him off. Don't worry about it, he said. I'm always happy to support a fellow artist. Still, if there's anything I can do for you. Mirio scratched his chin thoughtfully, a twinkle in his eye. I suppose there is one thing you could do. Izuku perked up. Oh. I could use some advice, he admitted. I have a date tomorrow night and I'm at a bit of a loss. He's not at all like your fellow, you see. We've only spoken online but he seems quite shy. I've been trying to decide where I ought to take him that wouldn't be too stressful. Any suggestions? Izuku's eyebrows shot up. After a moment, he grinned. What Mirio was telling him was coming in loud and clear. Me too. How about a movie, he suggested. It wouldn't require much talking and you could always go for dinner afterwards if he was feeling more comfortable. A movie? Mirio exclaimed. What a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Izuku said. What were you thinking of doing? Mirio laughed. I thought indoor skydiving might be fun, he admitted. Izuku's jaw dropped. He started to chuckle. Well, he said. You could always save that for the second date. Mirio stood up. That helps a lot, he said. Thanks, Midoriya. I suppose that makes us even. Izuku balked. Wait, that's not even close. Mirio patted Izuku on the shoulder. Wish me luck. I'll let you know how everything goes. He opened the door to his office. But don't forget to shut the door on your way out. Thanks again. With that, Mirio left. Eventually Izuku smiled. It's been a pleasure, Togata, he said. He logged out of Mirio's computer then stood and exited the office, closing the door behind him. He returned to the vacant set to put the tripod away and turn off the lights. When he was done, he returned to his workstation. It was hard to believe how late in the afternoon it was, most of the other photographers had already left. He sent an email to Yu to inform her that the photographs were ready to be looked at, then began to gather his things. So this is where you work. Izuku spun around in his chair. Katsuki was standing maybe 10 feet behind him, his hair still slightly damp. You're not supposed to be back here, Izuku said. The words sounded oddly familiar. Katsuki shoved his hands into his pockets. Yeah, well, he said, averting his eyes. Guess we're both not great listeners. Izuku suppressed a glare. He logged out of his computer and stood up. Where are Kirishima and Mina? What had happened during the photo shoot still weighed heavily in his mind. He couldn't help but feel guilty over how petty he'd acted. The wet look had been a success, but if he was being honest with himself, he hadn't done it for the band. He'd done it out of spite, to get even with Katsuki. They left, Katsuki replied. I told them to head out without me. Izuku blinked. Why? I thought we could go for drinks. Izuku stiffened. He turned his back to Katsuki and pushed his chair in. Oh, he asked, not without a trace of bitterness. You wanted to hang out? Or go on a date? Izuku choked. He turned and openly stared at Katsuki. His expression was unreadable. After a while he shook his head. I don't think so, he said softly. He swallowed the lump in his throat and grabbed his satchel. He was exhausted and sad and ready to go home. Izuku. Izuku froze. Katsuki looked at him imploringly, with no trace of anger or frustration on his face. Please. Katsuki's earnestness struck Izuku like a thunderbolt to the heart. It might be good for you to get some closure. As much as Izuku hated to admit it, today had made it very clear that he still wasn't over Katsuki. Katsuki had barely done anything to antagonize him and he'd still managed to stir up all of these emotions inside of him. If he was going to move forward with his life, he needed to get past these feelings for good. It was becoming increasingly clear to Izuku that in order to do that, They needed to talk. No drinks, Izuku croaked. We haven't really done great with those. Katsuki inclined his head. Coffee, then. Izuku slowly nodded. Coffee. A weight seemed to lift off of Katsuki. He stood a little straighter as Izuku finished gathering his belongings with trembling hands. When he started to head towards the main exit, Izuku stopped him. Not that way. Your fan club might be waiting. I'll take you out the employee exit. Katsuki frowned, confused, but nodded. He allowed Izuku to lead him out the back exit and into the early evening light.